October 1981. To the outside world, the Cold War looked frozen. The Berlin Wall still divided Europe. American and Soviet nuclear missiles remained pointed at each other. Millions feared that one mistake could trigger World War III. But behind the scenes, a different war was already being fought. Not with tanks, not with bombers, not even with nuclear weapons. This was a war for technology, a silent conflict fought inside laboratories, factories, embassies, and intelligence agencies. Every breakthrough in aviation, every new computer chip, every military innovation could shift the balance of power between East and West. And the Soviet Union had a problem. Despite being one of the world's two superpowers, its economy struggled to keep pace with the rapid technological advances of the United States and its allies. Developing cutting-edge technology from scratch required enormous investments, highly efficient industries, and years of research. The Soviet system often lacked all three, so Moscow found another solution. Instead of inventing, it would steal. Throughout the 1970s, the KGB built one of the largest technology espionage programs ever created. Its mission was simple: acquire Western scientific and industrial secrets, by any means necessary, hidden inside Soviet embassies around the world, operating under diplomatic cover. Hundreds of intelligence officers searched for valuable information. Their targets included aerospace companies, computer manufacturers, military contractors, universities, even private engineering firms. Every classified blueprint, every microchip, every technical report could save the Soviet Union years of expensive research. According to Western intelligence, this enormous operation became known as Line X, and for years, it worked remarkably well. Thousands of pieces of Western technology quietly disappeared behind the Iron Curtain, allowing Soviet engineers to copy or adapt innovations they had never developed themselves. Inside Moscow, few people truly understood the scale of this operation. Even fewer had access to its most closely guarded secrets. One of those men was Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Vetrov. Unlike field agents risking their lives overseas, Vetrov worked behind a desk. His job wasn't to steal technology. His job was to evaluate it. Every stolen document, every engineering blueprint, every scientific report eventually passed through departments connected to his work. He knew exactly what the Soviet Union was stealing. He knew where it came from, and most importantly, he knew how dependent the Soviet Union had become on Western innovation. From the outside, Vetrov looked like the perfect Soviet officer, disciplined, experienced, trusted by the KGB. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. Years of frustration, professional disappointment, and growing disillusionment with the Soviet system slowly changed the man behind the uniform. He had once believed he was helping build a stronger Soviet Union. Now, he began questioning whether the system deserved his loyalty at all. That question would eventually become one of the most expensive problems the Kremlin had ever faced. Thousands of miles away, in Washington, the CIA knew the Soviets were stealing technology, but knowing something was happening and proving exactly how it worked were two very different things. Western intelligence agencies suspected there was a massive Soviet espionage network operating across Europe and North America, but they had no complete picture, no names, no organizational charts, no detailed evidence. Without that information, stopping the operation was almost impossible. Then, everything changed. One Soviet officer quietly reached out to French intelligence. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't trying to escape the Soviet Union. He wanted something else. He wanted to expose the system from the inside. The French gave him a code name: Farewell. At first, no one imagined just how valuable this mysterious source would become. Over the following months, Farewell secretly photographed and delivered thousands of classified KGB documents. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Each document revealed another piece of one of the largest espionage operations in modern history. When the information finally reached American intelligence, CIA analysts realized they weren't looking at isolated reports. They were holding the blueprint of the Soviet Union's technological espionage machine. For the first time, the West knew exactly how the Soviets were stealing advanced technology, who was involved, where they operated, and what they were looking for next. It was an intelligence breakthrough unlike anything seen in years. But the CIA wasn't satisfied with simply arresting Soviet spies. Some officials believe, for years, the Soviet Union had played the same game: steal Western technology, copy it, improve it, and quietly use it to close the technological gap with the United States. It was a strategy that had worked surprisingly well. But in late 1981, everything changed. Inside CIA headquarters in Langley, analysts sat surrounded by thousands of classified documents. Every page came from one man, one KGB officer, one code name: Farewell. The documents revealed something the West had only suspected. The Soviet Union wasn't relying on a handful of spies. It had built an industrial-scale intelligence operation. Hundreds of officers, dozens of countries, thousands of targeted technologies, computers, aircraft, machine tools, semiconductors, software. Anything that could strengthen the Soviet economy or its military was a target. Most intelligence victories end the same way. You identify the spies, you arrest them, you shut down the network. Case closed. But some officials inside the Reagan administration believed that would be a mistake. Why destroy an enemy's intelligence network when you could use it against them? Among those thinking differently was economist and National Security Council official Gus Weiss. He had spent years studying Soviet efforts to acquire Western technology. He understood something many others did not. The Soviet Union had become dependent on stealing innovation. If that dependence could be exploited, the consequences could be enormous. Instead of blocking Soviet theft, the United States would quietly control it. Factories, defense contractors, technology companies would continue producing equipment that appeared completely normal. Blueprints would look authentic. Software would pass every inspection. Electronic components would appear genuine. But hidden beneath the surface, tiny defects would wait silently. Some would fail months later, others only under extreme conditions. Some designs would simply perform far below expectations. Nothing obvious, nothing that would immediately expose the deception. Just enough to waste years of Soviet engineering and resources. The brilliance of the plan wasn't destruction, it was uncertainty. Imagine you're a Soviet engineer. You receive advanced technology stolen from the West. You trust it. You build an entire project around it. Months later, it doesn't work. Was it a manufacturing mistake? A design flaw? A Soviet error? Or had the Americans planned this from the very beginning? Nobody knew. And that uncertainty spread through the entire intelligence system. For decades, every successful theft had been a victory. Now, every successful theft became a question. Can we trust what we've stolen? That single doubt was enough to slow projects, delay production, and force engineers to recheck technology they once accepted without hesitation. According to later accounts from officials involved in the operation, the goal was never simply to sabotage one machine. It was to make the entire Soviet technology acquisition program unreliable. Meanwhile, the CIA wasn't working alone. The FBI, NATO intelligence services, and allied governments across Europe all began sharing information from the Farewell Dossier. One by one, Soviet agents were identified, front companies were exposed, procurement networks collapsed, operations that had taken years to build suddenly became impossible to maintain. The organization known as Line X, once one of the KGB's greatest technological assets, was beginning to fall apart. But inside Moscow, the KGB still didn't know the full truth. They knew operations were failing. They knew technology was becoming unreliable. They knew Western countries seemed strangely prepared. What they didn't know was that the disaster had begun months earlier, the moment one trusted officer decided to betray everything. And while the CIA celebrated one of its greatest counterintelligence victories, that same man, Vladimir Vetrov, was about to make a mistake that would cost him his life. July 19th, 1981. The leaders of the world's most powerful democracies had gathered in Ottawa, Canada. Officially, they were there to discuss inflation, trade, and the struggling global economy. Photographers filled the conference halls. Television cameras captured every handshake. Everything appeared routine. But behind closed doors, one private conversation would quietly change the Cold War forever. French President François Mitterrand requested a confidential meeting with U.S. President Ronald Reagan. No advisors, no journalists, no public statements, only two presidents, discussing information so sensitive that even many intelligence officials had never seen it. Mitterrand had brought extraordinary news. France had recruited a highly placed source inside the KGB. His code name, Farewell. And according to French intelligence, this source had uncovered something far bigger than anyone had imagined. Not a single spy, not a single operation, but an entire Soviet system dedicated to stealing Western technology. Reagan listened carefully. The documents described hundreds of Soviet intelligence officers operating under diplomatic cover across Europe, North America, and Asia. They listed recruitment methods, priority targets, future objectives, even the specific technologies Moscow wanted to steal next. It wasn't simply intelligence. It was the Soviet Union's shopping list. And for the first time, the West knew exactly what the Kremlin wanted before it tried to take it. When the meeting ended, Mitterrand made an extraordinary decision. He offered to share the entire dossier with the United States. Within weeks, boxes of classified material began arriving in Washington. Eventually, the files reached CIA Director William Casey. Casey immediately understood their importance, but understanding the documents and deciding what to do with them were two very different challenges. Inside CIA headquarters, teams of analysts worked around the clock. Every document was translated. Every name was verified. Every operation was mapped. Large charts covered entire walls. Red lines connected Soviet embassies, front companies, intelligence officers, technology brokers, and covert procurement networks stretching across the Western world. Piece by piece, a hidden empire emerged. The picture was astonishing. For years, the Soviet Union had quietly built one of the most sophisticated technology acquisition programs ever created, and almost nobody in the West had realized just how successful it had become. As the analysis continued, A disturbing realization spread through the intelligence community. This wasn't just about military secrets. The Soviets were stealing everything: industrial machinery, computer software, precision manufacturing equipment, electronics, semiconductors, energy technology, aviation research. If it could strengthen the Soviet economy, Line X wanted it. Most officials proposed the obvious response: arrest the spies, expel Soviet diplomats, tighten export controls, shut the network down. It was the safest option, the simplest option, the expected option. But one man believed they could do something far more devastating. His name was Gus Weiss, an economist, a strategist, and an expert on Soviet technology acquisition. Weiss had spent years studying how dependent the Soviet Union had become on Western innovation. To him, the Farewell Dossier revealed more than an espionage network. It revealed a weakness that could be turned into a weapon. Instead of closing every door, what if America quietly opened a few? What if the Soviets continued stealing technology? Without realizing the technology had been carefully prepared for them. Not obviously defective, not enough to raise suspicion, just accurate enough to be trusted, and flawed enough to fail when it mattered most. It was a dangerous idea. If discovered, it could expose Western intelligence methods. It could trigger an international crisis. It could even compromise future operations. But if it worked, the Soviet Union would begin sabotaging itself without firing a single shot. President Reagan had entered office promising to compete with the Soviet Union on every front: military, economic, technological. Now, for the first time, American intelligence believed it had found a way to strike directly at one of Moscow's greatest vulnerabilities, not through war, not through sanctions, but through deception. The plan moved forward, quietly, carefully, patiently, because from this moment on, every blueprint stolen, every computer system copied, every piece of advanced technology carried back to Moscow might no longer be a Soviet victory. It might be exactly what the CIA wanted them to steal. By the beginning of 1982, the operation was already underway. Across Europe, North America, and Japan, the Soviet Union continued searching for Western technology. Nothing had changed, or so the KGB believed. Their agents still contacted suppliers. Front companies still purchased sensitive equipment. Engineers still requested advanced software, microelectronics, industrial machinery, and manufacturing technology. To Moscow, everything appeared normal. That was exactly what the CIA wanted. Behind the scenes, American intelligence had quietly changed the rules of the game. Some of the technology reaching Soviet hands looked authentic. It passed inspections. It performed exactly as expected, at first. But hidden inside were carefully designed flaws, not obvious defects, not failures that would immediately expose the deception. Instead, small imperfections, programming errors, design weaknesses, subtle engineering changes, enough to waste time, enough to create confusion, enough to force Soviet engineers to question everything they touched. According to Gus Weiss, the objective was never simply to break a single machine. The real objective was to make the entire Soviet technology acquisition program unreliable. Then, the consequences began to spread. Projects experienced unexpected delays. Equipment failed to perform as expected. Factories struggled with technology that should have worked. Engineers searched endlessly for mistakes, without realizing that the mistakes had been planted long before the equipment ever crossed the Iron Curtain. Inside the Soviet system, confidence slowly disappeared. Every stolen blueprint, Every software package, every electronic component, now carried an uncomfortable question. Can we trust this? And in intelligence, sometimes uncertainty is more damaging than destruction itself. The impact reached far beyond a few failed projects. Thanks to the Farewell Dossier, Western intelligence services identified hundreds of Soviet officers involved in technological espionage. Many were expelled from foreign countries. Front companies disappeared. Procurement networks collapsed. Operations that had taken years to build suddenly vanished almost overnight. According to Gus Weiss, the heart of Soviet technology collection crumbled and would not recover. Over the following years, the Soviet Union faced growing economic problems. Its industries continued falling behind the West. Its technology gap widened. Its economy slowed. Of course, no single intelligence operation caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. History is never that simple. Economic stagnation, political instability, the war in Afghanistan, falling oil prices, and internal reforms all played major roles. But the Farewell operation exposed one critical weakness. The Soviet Union had become dependent on stealing technology because it could no longer innovate fast enough on its own. When that pipeline of stolen innovation was disrupted, one of Moscow's greatest strategic advantages began to disappear. And what about Vladimir Vetrov, the man whose courage or betrayal, depending on which side of the Iron Curtain you stood, made all of this possible? He never saw the full impact of what he had started. After his arrest, the KGB uncovered his espionage activities. He was tried in secret, convicted of treason, and in 1985, executed by the Soviet state. His name disappeared from public view, but the documents he passed to the West continued shaping Cold War strategy long after his death. Today, more than 40 years later, historians still debate exactly how much damage the Farewell operation inflicted on the Soviet Union. Some argue it was one of the greatest counterintelligence victories in CYA history. Others believe its effects have been exaggerated over time, but on one point, there is little disagreement. The Farewell Dossier gave the West an unprecedented look inside the Soviet intelligence machine. It exposed how the USSR acquired Western technology. It dismantled much of the Line X network, and it transformed one of the Cold War's greatest espionage successes into one of its greatest intelligence defeats. The Cold War was never fought only with armies or nuclear missiles. It was fought with ideas, information, technology, and sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a bomb. It was a single secret carried out of Moscow by one man who decided to betray an empire